Welcome to Parallax, the resurrection of truth, beauty, and goodness. Parallax, a media war engine. Parallax, the construction amidst eternal decay. Parallax, the portal to the edge of chaos. Parallax, poem and provocation. Parallax, mad philosophers and tantric demigods. Parallax, totem for an unknown god. Parallax, philosophy and the return of the matriarch. Parallax, the end of the meaning crisis. Parallax, the whispering daemon in your ear. Parallax, the god of wisdom, wine and love. Parallax, your home for superior publications, podcasts and courses. Parallax, join us today.
So this is a poem by E. Cummings called Next to, of course, God, America, I. That's the title. Next to, of course, God, America, I love you, land of the pilgrims and so forth, oh. Say, can you see by the dawn's early my country 'tis of centuries come and go, and are no more what of it we should worry, in every language, every deaf and dumb, thy sons acclaim your glorious name by gory, by jingo, by gee, by gosh, by gum. Why talk of beauty? What could be more beautiful than these heroic, happy dead, who rush like lions to the roaring slaughter? They did not stop to think, they died instead. Then shall the voice of liberty be mute. He spoke and drank rapidly a glass of water. So over to you, Alex.
I'm tempted to give you to tell you all what poetry is before I begin. But this is not one of those, is it? We can talk about that later. Okay, so I live on Piety Street, and my studio burnt down the other day. Giant warehouse studio. And I wrote this: a palatial ghetto of piety, on fire, actually. Runted orange husks, the forensics. Beards of insulation dress the piano's wet. Aching melange of soot coats the world. Binding agents streak. Particulates hiss and snap. Daylight scarfs bleak children for bad suppers. Fire rages electric. Entergy suits bulge somewhere. While crisp material hangs in fried webs and charcoaled joists in marshmallowed pools heave in dank breezeways. And by the way, she's umbrellaed in pantyhose. Moist runs skinning her legless pose. Rank, dear Francine, neighborhood pet. Anyway, those lunging plumes grope the world. The rafters, black and potato crisp, flake like dead skies, leering at the molten floor. Wade slosh gummy, feet dribbling wrecks, crimp through the pools of fire-made soup. It pours like Fanta, fries in starry dunks. Torrential rasp of crackling life, singed tongue, sings my streaking house of music. Bulged lung of wordless smoke, palatial ghetto of piety on fire. I'll find some others here.
We should have like canned applause or something, or
Upon dildo symmetry, like upon golden pond, but different, she, agape, right tart, befleshed my meaty thing, standing meatily, until coming forcefully, the kind of come that comes cummily. I mean, coming upon supple skin belly, all cummy now from cum. Wait, a last drool of cum comes like a squeegee's last words before returning to that blue chemical slosh they sit in at gas stations. So I took the other day I took my dad from Colorado to LA because he couldn't live on his own anymore. He needed to be in assisted living, and he's wearing diapers and so on. And we take him on this last trip. He had taken me and my sister on these trips as kids throughout our childhood. He would take us through the Southwest, like the Arizona, Utah, that sort of area, Colorado, and so on. He loved that trip, and we would go all the time. That's my main memory of my dad. And suddenly now, me and my sister are taking him on his last road trip um, to a old person's home. Rucksack gleams in the ooze of its greedy little bulge, greedy for the outdoors, greedy for gorgeous, engorged gorges. Fractured mammoth earth vaunts in gaunt drag, picnic on Martian voodoo sand. Hi-ho, monumental valley, stunned panorama. Dad drags and drools and cackles and pisses in the stank bottle hanging from his belt like a pistolier pissing thick orangutan orange goblets of piss. My sister gags and runs off. I tough it out for another 30 seconds, dragging his diapers out from under the flaccid thigh, flaccid dick hoveling with flaccid hoods of skin, brave little shy skins, choiceless nudity of ancient man, a diaper riptide, swam forth like legionnaire wind, plucking my vocal cords and dragging my esophagus to meet with my tongue, a gag of sublimely primal simplicity, a sublime gag. His rucksack distends. The whine of bursting threads can be heard if you're quiet. Too many babies have been killed for poets to make poems. Dead babies have ruined poetry. Dead babies have ruined public enjoyment. Enjoyment cramps itself in stolen moment. Enjoyment cramps itself in stolen minutes. Kill enjoyment. None shall. I'm just going to skip down to this next bit. I had a wonderful day today stroking cats. Dead babies, though. The clouds are wonderful shapes and dead babies. I went for a walk in the late afternoon and kissed my beloved under starry moon and dead babies. I rang out songs blushing to croon, dead babies. We scrambled pine wool smoked by gray fire and flushed warm bread from our gelatin bowels and spun spermish bloom into fleshed cocoon. I feel a smile coming and sprint to the restroom. I guess I'll keep going. A love beyond this world. Shucks joinery. Think of Japanese furniture. Demiglace race war. Cakes the big cheese. Phenotypes of pale archery. A bend balletic law. Or brim chimneys piped on fangs. Simple. Or think about drowels or Dremels. That tool that comes in late and normalizes things. Drummers, maybe. Either way, friction haunts the edges. Blunt angles of wedged vice, like Christ hung round the dry pouch of your aging and nasty pooling neck. A ghost clung to itself, dreads the simplest wind. Anyway, all that is to say that God is brash hamburger, plain and simple. Plain and simple is the way I like things, and God. God likes things plain and simple. I once bought a wooden spoon and, because of it, had to give away all of my silverware to godless morons. Lex Diderot. Grope of the permafrost, hung the purple flowered ivy, or whatever it's called, like blank metaphor. It was literally freezing. Flora boiled in miracle snow. Flake skins wilt of will. Featureless pate of head, drawn in moonless night. Private secret, don't tell God. God, I said. I'll find one more here. I don't know how many minutes I'm into. I'm probably like 3 minutes into this.
Yeah, you got another 30 minutes to go at least, Alex.
Retwinkled bodies hung in deadly precision, spark frump of magic spoon, ambles about harvested wood, the table bleak and brawned by time and night, stacks old meats and decay and fallopian husk. Horning fruited night hosts a stillest life. A vaselined and colored wound glistens. She returned today to leave tomorrow. Literally. I mean, this isn't one of those poeticisms. She returns today to leave tomorrow, taking the dogs too. Wait a minute here. I think I'll. Vegetation grins aplumb with itself. Handsy leaves flutter the stems of shy growth. Wrung plums droop to pools of turnt flesh, daring drunkards of the jungle to floor their bellies in the aging dawns. Vast waste. Jousts in prude orbit, reaming the skull-boned rims with chaste pussies clamped in fur. Greased wraith, moaned in haze of dusk, flutters by winged appeal to dazed hearts gasping for aerated blood. Hooded bones draped in cummy gauze, wronged by monumental zipper or gargoyle panties, hang listless by major banks, frown brimming and in surplus. Throttled joys of rotting teeth, strangled plum skin candied tightly round the lambskin throat, tastes of jizz gone dry, cracked milk of prideless nature, nay, of jilted nature, nay, of rancid nature, nay, of nature. Round the domiciled belly, nipples wreathed in lactic acne. Ruddy pustules rib the hungry lips, and I wish to be food. I am Ozymandias, cravened by a talent too veiny to be sullied by education. Wicked education, corrosive drone of ink rivering the eyes, blotting the cream vast belly of parchment, blights the naked vision with a carnage of vediments, trim and measured, hemmed and hawed, sewing the watery flesh into tapestratic cage of preformed form or the performative performance. I then, stuffed too tightly within these eye cake buttons, must fucking pop. I'll stop there.
Are you sure? You don't have more for us?
Yeah, keep going.
Philosophy, maybe?
Keep going. We're not in a hurry.
Let me see. I got maybe one more. Where is it? Okay. Swiftly, blades of heat deny the Sabbath. Extol
We don't
decay.
know.
What? What'd you say?
Andrew's frozen.
Because we don't know. And everything's
What's
frozen.
that?
Yeah, you're frozen, Andrew. I think. Uh-oh.
I think it's better now. I just changed my week. I think we're good now. Yeah.
Okay.
So
I'll do one more.
yeah.
I'll do a
please.
long one. Okay.
Do a very long one. Yeah.
Okay. Swiftly, blades of heat deny the Sabbath. Extol the thunderbirds in heavy tolls. I tolls mount the gale. Blow hard the priestly sheen of suits and tan, coiffed rage of rancine feast, harms the goitered fringe of hand, rankled gargoyles line the shimmering desks, gardening reflections by prime light. Becouched by currents epileptic twitch, HD warfare pantomimes gestures, coarse and smelling all the par, greases and rungs the undergirdled machinery, siphons the depths of dinosaur cake, chocolatiers of war, smug and sate, hungry cavities slaked with tar, stuffed the straw man black of eye, visions blinder than blindness make. A strip of land, aye, stakes the heart and claims phenomenal blood, chosen ones, self-proclaimed, forge night from pain, a fear once real, more be enlived. Frankenstein the heart. Protect this fear through the corning light. Guard this trembling heart, that it may ceaselessly call itself the trembler. I do not wish to heal. What healing I do in protest. Heal at the risk of your identity, heal at the risk of our covenant. Once upon a time, we were mangled by hateful men, shredded flesh greased by vigil light, rancid piety wrapped bones at our gateless skins, bundled like straw men for burning, clawed into greedy trains, carouseled to dim ovens, herded to airless chambers thick with the damp of death, fizz of limber fog prying open unwilling lungs, lurching each to silent ruptures, a quiet dance of convulsing form, collapsing glacine timbers felled one by one, skeletor figurines, now vogue in hasty trench. Wretched grunt of the oddly unkillable, steams the excess heat of death. From still warm tongues and bosoms rises the last of their warmth, spilled to the blind frost of dawn, lost in the hoary gusts of regular wind one by one. Bones spun in rugged skins tumbled one by one, or burnt by oven to easy crisp, and shoveled as silt to feed the field, or lined as bowling pins long hasty ditch, and shot all at once, one by one, 13 million one by one. And now it's our turn. Skinning the concrete block, a string of words sprayed in drunken sprawl of arm, graffitied neath last night's municipal lamp and lowering moon, from the river to the sea. Harangue tongue of marsh and brine sat dumb in regular light. Synagogue raft, bound tight as unripe lemon, enwrapped in blonded bond, erupts euphonic glue of regathered arms, instant rebar, ties flesh to flesh, unifies the form to uniform. Cutting along bleached rivulet, where yesterwhen's crimson beach sits white, neath cleansing screech of TV UV, each eye reflects but a victimly snow.
Amazing. Thank you, Alex.
Cool.
Yeah, and I had a question, not directly related to your poetry, but it might be related anyway. And you were talking about your place burning down, and I was thinking about Aldous Huxley, and he said when that happened, it was a great relief to him because he felt free. So I'm wondering if this was completely devastating to you, or was there any kind of liberation from you know you know from that, or how are you feeling about that? I'm just curious, if you don't mind me asking this kind of question. It's not too
I mean, the Western therapy happy, somatic trained patient in me would say, well, yeah, I mean, I should feel there should be some sort of subtle subconscious reaction that I'm not facing, that like my stuff burned, man. But I as soon as I knew the hard drives were okay, I didn't care.
Hmm.
And yeah, that's a function of obviously, you know, so-called, um, well, it's a function of having more things than that, right? Like it's a function of being well off, having a home that didn't burn. It was just a studio, it wasn't my stuff. But the thing is that, like, the worst thing I ever lost in my life was this little cassette tape when I was 5 years old of me doing the soundtrack from Lean Stand By Me a cappella. I did the whole album a cappella, like, and then I had my 2-year-old sister do little backup chants and so on, and I'm like directing her. And it's the first piece of intellectual property I ever produced.
Hmm.
And when I lost that in a fucking storage war, which I don't know if you know what that is or have that in Europe, but it's you have a storage unit, and if you miss a day of payment, they'll auction off your storage unit
Uh-huh.
blindly to anybody. And they had a TV show called Storage Wars. Anyway, I lost mine in one of those, and I was on tour. I still think about it. Like, it still hurts me. Like, if you were like, "How do you feel about losing that cassette?" I could go on and on like it's a, you know, forever chasm. But like the studio, I don't know. Everybody just lost all their shit in LA, and that's where I'm from. So I have a lot of people, like
Hmm.
friends that lost a lot. Um, and obviously the whole city is, I don't know, 1/5 burnt or whatever it is. And I
Hmm.
think that has had an effect on me more. I think losing community, like losing communal spaces, is a kind of intellectual property loss, as opposed to losing a singular building. Like, something about you losing communal space, or something to do with that abstraction of community, that is actually facilitated by three-dimensional forms, like a cafe here, place we meet up, whatever. To lose those things is a more serious loss, I think. So anyway, long story short, like my l- I was gonna renovate the studio anyway, and it was getting very expensive, and I didn't have the money for it. And all of a sudden, there's a fire, and the insurance is now paying for the renovation.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know what the fuck. I feel like I did it on purpose. Of course, I didn't. It was a random electric fire.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm wondering, like, I was thinking that, you're a guy who's made something of yourself, unlike the rest of us deadbeats, and had some success in the world, won some Grammys and shit like that. Um, but also you spent a great deal of time thinking about loss and death and decay and I felt that in your poems, you know. Obviously
Yeah,
dead
I mean,
babies and whatnot.
dead babies. Yeah, yeah. You know, let's not let's not forget the dead babies. Yeah, I think the thing that I find reading, I think the thing I love about poetry is it's not the only. I find this in prose too, and I guess I find this in music sometimes, but less so. There's something about language which promises its own self-transcendence. There's something about language which, just the very gaps between each word, necessarily engage the listener. And so if you can, in a lot of ways, I was trying to explain poetry to someone literally the other day. I was like, well, because the temptation these days, and I understand, and it's a very transgressive temptation, is to call basically truncated prose poetry. Like, okay, I've written a paragraph, I don't want to write anymore, I'm a little bit lazy, it's poetry. And that's just one, like, it's a wonderful technique, but it's destroying the very premise of poetry, I think, which is that the difference between poetry and prose is that whereas prose attempts to fill in a given threshold of negative space between concepts, like the bird looked to the building, the bird was sad. Like I can tell you, I can be like, okay, that's prose because I've told you enough of the gaps, the meat of the negativity, that you don't have to do much heavy lifting to put this together. Somehow there's a relationship between the bird and the building and whatever. But if I stretch that gap further, and I force the reader to do like a majority of the creative heavy lifting in terms of the threading of the concepts, then all of a sudden it's poetry. I'm inviting you to participate. I'm actually forcing you, if you're willing, to bridge the divides. And I think that for me, whenever I am invited in some spectacular way to bridge the divides, I have my own aha, and so it's a more potent experience for me. That's why I don't really read prose. Like I'm just bored by them. I would prefer disparate concepts that I am then uh, uh, put on fire to bridge myself. And I think that that art form is lost in part because of the sort of smooth-brained imperative of consumer algorithms dictating a sort of feedback correspondence between the creator and the audience, where the audience you know is sort of subtly constantly telling creators everywhere to converge on depthlessness that is loaned a depth by irony alone.
Oh, that's
Like,
well put.
I'm going to give you a piece of prose, I'm going to say it's poetry, and the irony of my assertion is going to lend the statement, the paragraph, depth.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be informed of the depth of my poem by virtue of its ironic placement as a poem. And I just think that's cheap. I
Mm-hmm.
think that like, I like it at a certain point, but now it's become the standard. Like, I can't find a modern poem that actually takes some fucking poetic risk. It's very difficult to find that, you know? Um, and
That's why I was putting on E. Cummings, because there's kind of an innocence in his poetry, that I feel in some of your music, and but it's I don't know if that's the right word, innocence, because it's a profound innocence. It's not just like a naive innocence.
well, it's also the kind of innocence that gives you permission to take risks.
Yeah.
Like, if you pretend you're a child in a playground, you're gonna start to take some interesting creative risks. If you allow yourself to have a silly rhyming scheme, or to just, twist around the proper order of a sentence, as that poem does, in a sort of playful way, all of a sudden, that's another kind of armor. It's the armor of sort of, irreverence. But I think maintaining a kind of child's play with everything is pretty necessary, even just for basic communication. Otherwise, everything just becomes, I don't know, boring. Yeah,
Prosaic. Yeah,
prosaic. Yeah.
totally. Yeah. So I have more questions, but maybe some of the other folks want to comment on the poems, or ask, could have a bit of a circle here.
Yes, I was when I was listening to you, had this feeling that it sounded so good that everything made sense.
Oh, that's cool. I like that.
It was a real pleasure. And I was just waiting, and it's in a very positive way, waiting to be entertained, and I knew I was going to be,
Mhm.
which is yeah. So I really enjoyed it. It's interesting that you mentioned not being surprised. My daughter read me a poem last night. She's 16, by Rudyard Kipling, called Boots. Do you know
Mm.
this poem? It's really wild.
Um,
It's completely bizarre.
I don't know if I know that one. I know the other one that's always posted
Yeah, I know.
around.
One that we hate, right?
Yeah.
White man's burden and all that. Um, But and so I realized, my God, these people can do it. I mean, if and this is about his Boer War experience, and he was like, march, 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 boot, boot, boot. It was completely different from anything I'd ever seen him do. Another one of my favorite contemporary poetess I'm very close to, Alice Notley. To me, she's a great inventor of poetic universes, and she takes a lot of risks. But
I'm gonna write those down.
okay, in the chat. But like my thanks to my daughters. Just, wow, what a pleasant surprise. I mean,
That's fun. Yeah.
he's still a fascist colonialist and all that, but what a great poet.
Yeah. Also, if anyone has some, again, this is advertised as an open mic, but it usually generates into just the conversation. But if anybody has a poem or something they want to share, kind of anything goes. So.
Yeah, that's really nice. Alex, I was really taken by the tension in your work between the descriptive, observational, and the musicality and the lyric, and
Mm.
and those moments where I could see the poem push you off stage, so to speak. So like at certain moments you were almost following that internal rhythm, and I'm very interested in music towards meaning. That's what the type of work I kind of do,
Mm.
and also like that participatory. It's like if we're describing what poetry is, poetry is a meeting place, right? Poetry isn't me to you or you to me. It's going into a place of the unknown exploratory. So you go from the ontological to the epistemological, and if you could do a poetry from the ontological, um, with a sense of almost primal renaissance, right? So like this is a vibrational force where the musicality comes through. And at moments in some of the pieces you were writing, it was like, oh, okay, he's trying to say this, but then the poem's going here, and he's following it. That's cool. And then you try to bring it back, and then I see like this tug of war a little bit. And I just an observation. I'm wondering about your writing process. Like
I
what?
like that. I like that. That's very true. Yeah. Like, I mean, the thing I love about poems, even when I'm writing prose, I actually start with the same process, which is it's like smacking the horse and you start going and you're like, okay, where are we going? What's coming out of me? And then, if you're writing, if it's a novel, which I've been working on for 10 years, I'm, I'm, I'm like, okay, yes, but we have to go, we have to go to, we have to refer to the rest of the novel here. We can't just, or otherwise I have to delete it and turn it into a poem. I was actually tempted to read some of that because I have that process. But the idea of like following, you're saying something, and that's the beauty of poetry is like when you give yourself that poetic license. I mean, really, the poetic license is for the poet. It's not for anything other than the benefit of no one else. But you give yourself that poetic license, and suddenly, um, I mean, you really are vesselized. You really are behind the muse. The muse
Mm,
is like just in front of you,
Mm.
and you're kind of like, just trying to follow along. And but it's interesting. I mean, the interplay for me, like on a granular level between, okay, I'm following the muse and I'm going, oh, I'm really good at this. Ooh, this is sounding great. I'm going to indulge and indulge and indulge in the words and the thing and the blah and ooh and the this and the that. And I get really
no.
into almost like it becomes very selfish. And then all of a sudden I break from it, like, okay, I obviously have to squeeze some lime on this. Um, I have to cut this with something because this is self-indulgent. Like I followed the muse, then I thought I was the muse, and now I have to let everyone know that I got entangled in my own process with this break. And I
Mm,
actually like none of that's explicit in the poems, but they're implicit. Like you'll feel an
mm,
honest thing happen, then you'll be like, oh, now he's like writing
mm,
poetry. Oh, now he cuts it. Now he stops himself by saying something very direct, breaking the fourth wall sort of thing, which
Right.
I like doing. And then I can go again. And if I want, I can continue from there in a real way. It's kind of like being on stage. I would be like, I'm in the zone, I'm in the zone, I'm in the zone. Now all of a sudden I'm watching myself be in the zone, and now I'm doing things that I think would be iterative of that zone and look like that zone. And lo and behold, now I'm not in the zone. I'm pretending I'm in the zone. Now I have to stop. And I'll literally on stage, I would just stop. I'd stop singing even and
Mm.
like go into like a rest pose standing and just wait until a natural sort of like a spark emerges and then follow it again, because otherwise you can really just follow the simulacra of inspiration, the inspiration of inspiration of inspiration of inspiration 12
Mm.
times moved until all of a sudden it's you might as well be uh you're self-optimizing yourself in real time. It's a very funny thing, but when you follow yourself and then refine yourself as yourself, being yourself, um it's like watching the next fucking um anyway, it's a thing that you see happen to artists in general. You love something they do, they know you love it, so they start doing more of it. Then you show them you love that more, and they do more of it. Next thing you know, it's dead, and it's just
Mm.
It's a
it's
Civil War reenactment. That's what Johnny Rotten said about the Sex Pistols reunion, like a
a Civil
reenactment.
War reenactment.
He
Sure,
said
yeah,
that like the
exactly.
Sex
Well,
Pistols reunion was like, it's not real. I know it's not real. I'm just reenacting it. I'm just
yeah,
giving people a show. Yeah. I'm not
yeah, but
really.
you can do that. That happens in real time while you're writing. It can happen in the span of 10 minutes, like
Yeah.
Oh
30
yeah.
seconds. You're like, oh, this is fire. And then you're like, oh, that's like I should do more of that thing. As soon as you do that, you're already lost. And
Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard
Well,
to know when it's good, right? You never really know.
yeah.
Somehow, how do you know if it's good? Like if it's really hitting, if it really is, um,
well, that I think comes down to musicality for me is
yeah.
like it's a it's a pressure and release thing. You can tell when something is like, okay, it's working, it's working, it's working, it's working, and then all of a sudden you're like, wait, this feels deflated somehow. And obviously, also, art in a lot of ways is knowing when to stop. So
Hmm.
there's a refinement of, I mean, in a lot of ways, mastery. You can be great, but mastery is knowing when to stop. Um, so yeah, I don't know. You you grow that muscle somehow.
But you give yourself some time though, right? In other words,
Yeah.
if I was worrying about how good I was as I was writing, boy, that would be tough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, it's true. I mean, I don't know. It's funny the extent to which I have a secondary view on myself, or like a witness, like a judgmental sort of real time. Is this good? Uh, in some ways, there's like that's constantly ticking back and forth for me, maybe, uh, and it's hard to get rid of. But um, it's difficult. The audience capture occurs whether or not there's an audience, whether or not you're writing it for public release. There seems to be
Your own audience. You're your own audience. Your ego is
Yeah.
you're
creating your own
you're your
audience.
own audience,
Yeah.
but yeah, and sometimes that abstraction takes on different forms of yourself. I don't know. I think that for me, it's helpful for whatever reason to. It's just going to sound really stupid and retarded, but to strive for greatness. For me, it's helpful to compare my music, like to be like, oh, is this good? Is this Beatles good? Like for me, this is like, is this Beethoven? Like, would Beethoven approve? Would he like suck my dick for this piece? Like, what would he say?
Mhm.
I think that's for me.
Yeah. Uh,
That's helpful, and yes, it's egoic and so on, but so what? And it's like when people are like, "Well, you would never write something like creativity doesn't come from competition or spite." It's like, well, What? Yes, it does.
You
I
have to have
mean,
models. You have to have
you
models.
have to have models, but you also have like the Sergeant Pepper's was written in response to pet sounds. Like it was like,
Mhm.
oh yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Like
machine.
there is
Weird.
the line between inspiration and competition, I think, is quite thin.
Hmm. What about Alex? What about the relationship between you talked about poetry and prose, but what about poetry and philosophy? Because maybe the folks here don't know that you do a lot of philosophy. I mean, you,
That's interesting. Yeah, no, it's funny, man. I get so annoyed, and maybe it's a question of like I really like I get and this may be me being a teenager and still in my philosophical process, but to me, I find poetic philosophers absolutely tedious and ridiculous and suspect. I think that
Mm,
when you want to communicate a philosophical concept or a scientific concept or any concept that you think is valid in moving forward human thought about a given subject, you should try and communicate it in the most precise language possible, given that that precision does not ruin or paper over a given truth. Now, of course, there's a contrary relationship between truth and accuracy, or truth and confidence or assuredness live at opposite poles of the sort of informational spectrum. So there's an incredible tension between trying to state something as truthfully and or as truthfully and as precisely as possible. The more precise, the more informational constraint you have to bring to bear on your language. The more constrained that language, the more it's omitting. The more it's omitting, uh, uh, the more tenuous its relationship to truth becomes. So it's difficult, and I understand the impulse of a lot of philosophers to be like, you know, um,
mm,
really poetic with their expressions and keep it loosey goosey and open ended. But actually, my sense is that that is a fear impulse. That is a fear of wrongness. You can only be wrong if you get specific. If you remain ambiguous, you can always, remain right. And very often, as we know, really obtuse statements actually paper over a general ignorance of a given subject. So for me, I like the uh, I don't know. It's almost like the test, the crucible of trying to be specific with my language, which is why on IDW stuff, you'll see me posting very specific language that for some is like, well, this is obtuse, but no, actually, each of these words refer to a very specific definition. And very often I'm describing it. Very often I'm talking didactically and literally about something which, yes, is inherently, phenomenological, which means inherently fuzzy, but I'm trying to get clear on the fuzziness. And so I'll write in ways that don't feel very flowy or don't feel very musical, I'm sure. But I think for me, creatively, that's a benefit. Like it's almost like the pauper who on the weekdays is living in ordinary time, really regimented, and so that on the weekends, when he cuts loose into ritual time, it is cutting loose.
yeah.
There's no sort of middle ground, mid-grade sort of like acquiescence or convolution of the ordinary time and ritual time. So for me, poetry is ritual time.
Yeah.
Philosophy is actually, ironically, ordinary time informed by my ritual time. Do
Huh.
you know what I mean?
Mm.
Yeah, I think I get that. I was thinking about I was listening to Nick Cave an interview and he says he wears a suit every day. He wakes up in the morning, wears a suit, and somebody was asking what's his creative process. He goes to the office at 9 o'clock. He has lunch at 12. He comes home at 5. He's wearing a suit. It's like that's like Nick Cave. Anyway, completely ritualized his life to the point where he only can wear one thing and do one thing, and so that he has all this enormous creative freedom or something like that, or
Yeah,
way of
yeah. I would just
expression,
change
right?
the phrasing to he's traditionalized his life so that he can engage with ritual. Because to me, ritual is opposed to tradition. It's like he wears the suit every day. He's regimented so that ritual time being that space where we lose ourselves. We have a one-to-one connection with God or whatever it is.
Right.
And then we come back to sort of an ordinary regimented thing. And I do think that there's a relationship there. There's obviously a dialectic there, socially, historically, and then if we look probably personally, and you know, a lot of the, I don't know, Burning Man adjacent New Age community is going to want to balk at the idea that you should live your life in some regimented fashion in order to ritualize the
Mm.
moments. But
That's why they produce such mediocre crap, right? Because
exactly,
they have too
exactly.
much freedom and too many, too much money,
They're
and
expressing themselves too freely too much of the
yeah,
time, so
right.
that when like the you know breadth produces shallowness, like the relationship between breadth of behavior, for instance, if my behavior today extends to all my days, then I have a shallowness of behavior, so to speak. Like there's a relationship between shallowness and depth, and of course narrowness, or sorry, shallowness and breadth, and narrowness and depth. So if you reserve your depth for like these particular moments or weekends, those moments are more likely to go deep, and that's simply because our brains cannot persist in one state or the other, but particularly cannot persist in a state of what I call, well, in any ways, like a um, energetically free energy maximization state. Like the brain is constantly converging on, sorry to get stupid, this is me being philosophical. So the brain is constantly converging on a free energy minimization state, which is to say the most efficient state possible. I don't want to think, for instance, most of the day, I don't want to be like, yes, this is a cup, but what if it isn't? What if it isn't just a cup? That would ruin, like that would take up too much energy. I wouldn't get anything done, right? But when I am being poetic and I reserve the space for a maximization of free energy, which is to say, I reserve the space for a highly inefficient state where I say, what if this is a pterodactyl, right? Or I start creating the impossible intermediates, or whatever the term is, from some fucking thinker of creativity. I can't remember. But when I start creating odd juxtapositions and start and again, poetry, I start creating those odd juxtapositions. I'm trying to find an interesting one here, but like okay, like uh a fucking scotch tape and a table tennis paddle, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well,
Well,
during my
what about,
normal hours, I don't need to give a shit what the relationship between these two things is, right? But if I'm going to suddenly, because it's wasting my energy,
yeah.
literally actually wasting my fucking energy. But if I if I decide to reserve that kind of space for a given time, then I can actually create these very acute bouts of energy wasting or inefficiencies, which produce innovation and invention. And so I think that that's why, like, those of us who write a lot or whatever, and we experience how we prefer to write, or we tend to write our most creative aspects of the things we write in bursts, as opposed to the 8-hour day of hammering shit out.
Mm.
It's because the brain can only really do those hyper creative things in bursts, because energetically we have like a constraint on the amount of inefficiencies that we can produce. And I think that art, and I know this, I'm intentionally phrasing this controversially, but I think art and every aspect of depth and cultural depth is actually produced by cognitive inefficiencies, or what I like to call suboptimalisms, like suboptimal mental moments.
Cool.
And then we
I have
optimize
an
them.
example
Yeah,
from one of your
boy.
poems. I want to just put because I was thinking about one of your poems. It was the one about your dad,
Oh
and
yeah.
in one sense, when you were reading it, I was expecting something very moving, even sentimental, and that would make me want to cry. And then the poem was actually very clinical in its description. That made it more moving because there's so much you're not saying, right?
Mm. Hmm.
Uh, uh, so that's off the negative space is often really
Yes,
powerful in poetry.
it is, man. It's that it's acknowledging all the things the words can't say, but saying words in such a way that they point to the negativity or they point to their own constraint. Um, and then you're like, it's and I think that's the case in all things, movies and all writing. Um, yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that. But when you talk about the non-optimal, to me, that's pointing at the ontological, right? And to
Yeah.
me, language is the epistemological. It's the knowing part, and that's the difference between philosophical poetics and poetics. In philosophy, rightfully so, you want to be as precise as possible, but you're using a broken technology, which is this language, because language is is the description of something, which I would say that is the ontological root of things. And so like we're trying to use this broken technology to get back to what is that pure expression. Like when you're talking about the negativity, it's like, that's Keats, right? It's a negative capacity, to hold what cannot be said or what cannot be um, uh, apprehended logically, and that's where art takes you. Art takes you to that place, that of away from the egoic, self other world. And when you go into that space, whether it's through um, some sort of linguistic, epistemological, poetic, or chanting sort of protocol, or deep or delving into it towards the musicality, which I prefer. It takes you out of your head. It takes you out of yourself. And as a writer, like my best work comes when I'm not there, right? It's like when I'm away from it, and it's not an automatic thing, but it's waiting and tapping into that source. So I think there's those two worlds exist, and there's both super important. We need to do the philosophical analysis like we do in IDW, although I never say anything there, and and the poetic expression of it, because you cannot bring what poetry um, brings to us into like that IDW space. You can't know it that way. It's a different knowing.
Different kind of knowing, but it's thinking. Like I was having a conversation with Cadell, and he's like, Cadell, I noticed he's a philosopher, so he has to think through everything he does. Like, what the fuck? Why are you thinking through everything you do? Like, I don't want to think through everything I do. For me, that would be extremely painful, and I was thinking, I guess that's why I'm not a philosopher. Well, maybe I just don't have the talent, but I don't want to think through everything in that intense. And I respect it. I think it's people who have that gift for it. It's incredible, but I almost have a contempt for it at the same time because I don't want to do that, and it seems to lead to so many blind alleys, and it seems to be so full of sort of, yeah, I don't know how to say that, but you get what I'm saying, Alex?
Yeah,
Or
Oh yeah, it's contemptible. I mean, I think it's contemptible
it
when I'm
is,
doing it. It's evil. I mean, it's like it's the least religious. Uh, I mean, it's really like a teenager's overture to fuck you. It's like philosophy trying to figure out the gift of experience and be like, oh, it's like looking a gift horse in the mouth,
Hmm.
like at the highest level. Like we're given life and we're like, okay, yeah, but but like why? And it's just, you know, and it's just so rude.
Yeah.
So and yet there's a compulsion there that I am inclined to honor. There's an itch there to scratch that
Hmm.
you know,
I think it
the
takes a
itch
certain
itch
type
must be honored too. Like if you're having the itch, you know, it doesn't have to be honored. I mean, there's a ascetic sort of nobleness in refusing to itch it. But you know, when I get very excited, when I feel the muses stirring about, you know, like how consciousness works, and I'm like, I think I have a thing. I think that, you know, this and that like conform to the notion of my experience, to the phenomenology of phenomenology. Like, um, it's very difficult, you know, it feels very similar to having a great idea for a song. It feels like a creative act, and so there's an honoring there. But I do have the lurking fear, like, you know, again, you know,
Yeah.
beautifully
That's why I
egoic.
feel like pushing back against saying it's not exactly like that. It's not, there's no poetry in philosophy, because I think it's a very peculiar kind of poetry.
And
Well,
And I
it's
don't think it should
informed
be,
by
I don't think it should be poetic like in any flowery kind of way. But I think there's an artfulness and a, you know, a kind of artistic beauty to it that is, and I think poetry also needs precision on some level, even though it's a different kind of precision. It might, you know, I don't know. Anyway.
no, I think it needs precision in but it's like whatever that means, sort of thing. I think that I don't know, philosophy that I think poetic philosophy is yeah, no, I hate it. It's a
Okay.
crutch. It's
what about
bullshit. It
what
has
about
nothing to say, and any child could be like, you know, well, the vaingloriousness of attempts on the phenomenological precipitate the very experience we are negotiating in real time. You know, some bullshit I just made up. So the thing is that, and someone would be like, "Holy shit, that was fucking," good." But like,
Heisenberg?
Oh, that's great.
I had a
Jim, what's going on, man? You look like you're like a New Yorker, like sitting there reading your newspaper, and then he flashes on revolutionary message on the screen, and then he goes back to his. What's going on? No, I
Sorry,
can't hear you. You're muted.
you're unmiked.
You're unmiked or muted or something. Yeah, I can't hear you. Go back to your newspaper.
You know Kenneth Coke's essay on what is poetry? Kenneth Coke, this gorgeous
No.
essay. Oh, it's a magnificent essay. And one of the many exercises he proposes is to write a bad poem. And so when you do this with students, of course, they write good poems. You deliberately set out to write a bad poem. The self-consciousness of what it is that is a bad poem, when you begin to like surround it with your intention, all of a sudden it turns into a good poem.
Now
But
I'm
and then you
here.
start breaking rules.
mm,
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
like
my
acting when
experience.
they're like
Go ahead. Sorry.
the only way to act drunk, you know, like is to try and not be drunk. The only way to act like this is like a common like sort of director thing, like little
Mm.
director meme. Like if you want to direct someone to be drunk, make
yeah.
sure that they like try not to be drunk and so on.
hmm Yeah, I show that to my students. It's great. It's like you're obviously controlling yourself in a very artificial way. And so that makes you tremendously drunk as opposed to falling about.
Right.
Or
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Mhm,
I had
mhm.
a professor of philosophy at the University of Chicago who was the anti-hero of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, Robert Persig's book. And he was precision personified. He wrote his thesis on Spinoza at Columbia. He brought humanities to the University of Chicago. He brought Aristotle to America, and he held his hand. And his his approach to philosophy was that you can only read a philosopher if you know how they use the commonplaces, word, thought, thing, and action, so that you don't distort their thought. So this is extremely powerful, and his courses were like I mean, his level of knowledge was extremely painful to us. And quite a few books have been published with his work. He's relatively unknown because there isn't any actual clear philosophy being expressed, rather than this is what you can approach it. And the recent head of the Department of Philosophy of Chicago basically said that Richard McKeon was a waste of time. It's amazing. He really said it. And I'm saying, but if you read McKeon, you can read a philosopher, and if you don't like it, you can say, well, maybe it's me, as opposed to there's something wrong with this guy's thinking, or I don't like the way he puts things together, because he's just he's not of my time, he's not of my age. And you know how we were forbidden to read Aristotle because he created the Dark Ages. Remember? I don't know if you remember. This is before.
Really?
When you
That
actually
was a thing?
when you read him, you realize he's actually kind of interesting. He's kind of amazing, and actually kind of poetic too. The concision and the self-referential amazingness of a lot of what he says.
I was going to say earlier, the precision that ancient Greek and classical Sanskrit also allowed for extremely flowery and beautiful language.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's this, well, it's, I don't know, it's like there's a sort of a paradox there. Yeah. Again, it's if you try to do it, you know, you can't do it. It's impossible. But well, I think my turn towards poetry, right? I was trying to write a lot of prose and thoughts, and I was like everyone else. I was putting my thoughts out onto the internet, you know, and I was getting all this feedback, and some of it was positive, and some of it was negative, and I just got sick of having a conversation with the internet. Like, I don't want to have a conversation with the internet. I want to have a conversation with you know, the red goddess. You know, that's what my little book of poems was about, but not the internet. You know, I felt that just as you say, the prosaicness of it, you know, became so oppressive at a certain point. Um,
That's why poetry belongs in dive bars.
yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
In places like this, which is the equivalent of a dive bar, I suppose. Yeah, for Zoom rooms.
I don't know, you know, like pushing back on dive bars. Although I totally get it, and I think you know, a sense of permission is really important, and the environment will negotiate that sense of permission for you in a lot of ways. So if you arrange yourself in a dive bar, you may feel more inclined to take some chances, and that's very important, and so on. But the look, I'm going to preface everything I'm about to say with that if you actually believe in a historical dialectic, you don't actually need to change anything because things are just going to change. Like whatever dominant faction you hate is going to be the backdrop for your own revolution. So you should actually really appreciate that they're there creating some kind of homeostasis against which you can create a new dynamism. Nevertheless, the current mode of populist democratization of art, I think I'm just going to start speaking out against. I think that I'm going to say not everyone should be an artist. I think that I'm going to say that that most art sucks. I think I'm going to say that if you have a mentality which facilitates the participation of everyone, you have the obviously I don't want to say that yet. I want to say the not the group think, the decisioning by committee of art, because when everyone's I think I'm in music, right? I'm a musician, so I'm on the front fucking lines of the democratization of technologies for artistic purpose to humanity, right? Like these days you can download an app and you can literally make a song in 3 seconds without any prior knowledge. Now that's great. That's wonderful. Like if we were to say that all ideas are just blueprints and we shouldn't even have to have know-how, we should just automatically, sort of platonically, sort of emboss and extrude blueprinted ideas from the minds of people directly into consumable form. I dig that. That's why I just like I've thought about that, and I think that's great. Like, and I have stories about collaborating with people who operate like that, and it was great. But it is demonstrably and the evidence points to, and it's all converging on a homogeneity. There were amazing studies, because you'd be like, no, music's just as interesting now as it was in the 70s. You just have a sort of like, histrionic approach and so on. And no, actually, there's been studies that have taken the last, a million songs between 50s and now across genres and proven that music is actually converging on a homogenized, the same choral structures, the same melodic structures and similar dynamics across all genres. It was called the Million Song Study, and you can look it up. It was conducted in 2012, and it's only worse today. The top 10 movies of this last year, you should look them up. Every single one of them was a sequel.
Crap, yeah.
Yeah, you look up the one, 1972 as opposed to 22, and I just love that one. But it's, The Godfather, Last Tango in Paris, The Deliverance. You have even fucking Deep Throat, an undistributed porno, is in the top 10, 1972. Not one single anywhere. I mean, what do you call it anywhere? A sequel. And anyway, so the reality is we're converging on a homogeneity, and part of that is, ironically, movies. Why have they changed? I score movies. I see the first cut. I'm like, this is brilliant. Jesus Christ, I'm lucky. Fourth cut, it's a piece of shit. Now, what happened? They audience tested it.
Right.
And they lent it to decision by committee.
Of
They got
course.
everybody involved after the director and so on. Everybody started chiming in, and it just went.
So the
and
auteur, like David Lynch, is dead, right? It seems out there, and there was all these committees and blah blah blah. But I have another question about this because I think that's pretty obvious right now. Like,
Okay, fine.
kind of no, sorry, Alec. I mean, but that art kind of
Is
sucks
it though?
today.
Like, I don't know. I feel like every artist I've ever seen, ever interviewed is like, so what's special about your artistic process? Anyone can be an artist, man. Like
Yeah,
anybody can do.
no.
Like
I mean, that's
grab the
wrong,
tools.
obviously.
My
right?
mother.
But
Yeah,
but
like,
the thing is,
or artists can't say AI is bad. Only a few of them. Nick Cave is one of them, but most artists can't say that, right? You have to be like, it's a tool. Like, this is great. Like, think about things we can do, and blah blah blah. And like, you gotta like, prompting is an art, kind of, if you think about it. Like, it's so dumb, but we have such a mandate for populism. We have such a mandate for democracy and democratization that we're forgetting that if you don't have boundaries around given little enclaves of thought, behavior, then actually what you end up with in the end is uniformity, because pluralism is depends on boundaries.
so
Without
what's the remedy? Like, do we need to bring back the auteur artist
You have to
again?
bring
And
back-
I think
yeah,
there's something
you do.
wrong with that also, and that's what I want to ask you about. Because I think that
you have to-
if
number
there's a
one, you
certain
have to-
point, hold
you
on,
have to
can
get
I
rid
just
of
finish?
audience capture, which you
What?
did, right? You said you have to get rid of audience capture. Number one, you have to get rid of the feedback, which begins to flatten, because that's algorithmic. You start doing, I had a nice post on Substack. Oh, everybody likes this one. I guess I'll do more of that. Oh, everyone liked that. You keep refining, optimizing. Next thing you know, who's writing the article?
Yeah,
You are the
exactly.
audience.
Yeah.
So
That's the
you,
feeling.
and by the way, again, we're in groupthink. So we're talking across platforms. We're talking about a general homogenization when that feedback loop is in force. You were like, okay, I'm going to drop out. Actually, I'm going to have a smaller feedback loop, like maybe this live thing or whatever you think your personal feedback loop is, the critic in your head, whatever it is. But you're constraining the extent to which you're allowing groupthink to influence your art. And I think that's step one.
Yeah, that is the way, and I agree. But there's one more
Criticism-
thing.
Criticism got canceled.
What's that?
Criticism got canceled. Yes, it did.
Yeah,
Everything,
criticism
everyone
got
went to
canceled.
Tokyo,
Yes, that's another
you know.
thing. I mean, again, that feeds into the uniformity thing. But okay. So my question is, okay, if you're the author or the artist, you know, the good artist is fully, you know, completely dedicated to his craft, like 100%, and to the point of, you know, near suicide, or you know, if you look at the history of artists. And is that
Yeah.
a good thing? And I don't know, like, I don't know if we want to bring the author back. I don't know if that's a good idea. I think, and this is what Nick Cave said when
How
his kid
empathetic of
died.
you. Wow, Sweeney.
How would you
Hold
do
on.
So
it?
kind.
How would you do
When
it anyway?
well, let me finish here. When Nick Cave, his son died, he said, "No, I don't believe that shit anymore. You know, what matters is basic things. You know, not being an artist." So anyway, that's kind
Yeah.
of sounded a bit reactionary, but there's some truth in that, and I was just thinking about that. And
Well,
I don't know what you think about that.
there's both. There's both. But you know, you know, like I agree with Alex. You know what you're saying is the audience capture, but you know, from a creative standpoint, the audience comes last, right? It's like, you know, it's like you don't give a fuck, you know, where this thing's going to go. You're doing it because you have to do it, and it's coming out of you, and you're being true to that. And if you do the truest possible thing you can, and you put it out there, well, then we'll see. You know, I mean, if you're trying to create something with an audience in mind, you're fucked. You know that is, well, I mean, that might get you 2 records, but you know, it's not going to get you a career. You
Yeah.
know, and it's not going to
Although
get.
in writing classes at universities, the first thing they teach you is who's your audience.
I'm wrong, right?
Capitalist writing classes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Go get an MFA, and you know,
Yeah.
we'll see what you produce.
Creative
No,
class.
yeah, I mean it.
Well, anything
Yeah.
good that's ever been done is breaking away from good opinion on some level, or the collective superego. It's
Yeah.
always a breaking away from that. It's always saying no, fuck you, on some level. You have to do that once, you know.
Unless little children are involved.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess the art now is just like it's somehow everybody's a little child. You can just play with little toys and supposedly create art instead of be fully dedicated to some sort of
Because
thing.
Alex, you're in the US, so I mean, I get the feeling that what you're describing is much more intensely corrosive and limiting than maybe in France. I don't know. But I mean, I was in this poetry
That's
MFA
everywhere.
thing online, and I literally could not communicate with the people there because the way that I was using language, they were very politically sensitive to this and that. And they said, "Oh, that's an engaged poem." And I said, "No, it's just a poem I wrote. I don't care about being engaged, and unless it's to a beautiful woman." But I mean, it was I could not communicate. And I
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Every word is suddenly charged with these like political implications, and suddenly, yeah. I
David,
think that the US is thankfully exhausted, I think, of that sort of vigilance, like linguistic vigilance.
hopefully. I was going to say, David, last time when I read, I was saying, you know, I haven't been reading, and it's exactly because of that.
Yeah. Because you're afraid of your audience. The audience is going to become a mob and kill you, you know? You're afraid you put yourself in front of an audience, then you're going to be a scapegoat of some kind, you know?
I think
Which
there's a
happens
way to
anyway,
play with
but
that though, right? Like the Dead Babies poem. I'm playing with that, obviously. I'm playing with the prohibition on enjoyment, the prohibition on. There was a time, you know, it's ironic that, you know, state of conditions hasn't changed, and yet now the time has passed. But there was a time within which I felt like there was an actual prohibition on posting anything publicly that didn't have to do with Palestine. Now, that's my particular group, right? But that's where that poem came from. I'm having fun with my girlfriend and dead babies, and so on. And so the idea that, you know, I guess what I'm saying is there's a silver lining to all of any prohibition, of course, has a silver lining. There's a way to to sort of you know, move your way into the center of the conversation without them sort of understanding and bring to them something new. I don't know exactly what I'm saying, but there's something about the woke prohibition on language that creates furtive new ground for poetry, actually. Because now that some words are actually illegal, like we're back in Oscar Wilde territory, and it's very furtive.
That's juicy, huh?
Yeah.
Prohibition was a big silver lining for organized crime.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was.
Well, the dead babies thing is interesting because that poem. It's hard to know whether you're trying to say something political or not. It's like, and it just doesn't. It doesn't like a poem doesn't say anything. It sort of allows you to kind of be stuck in this sort of like, what is he saying? And but you don't get an answer, and you shouldn't have an answer. There should be no answer to that. It just should be hanging in the air in some way. In that tension of no answer.
No, well, the tension is participatory, right? You know, so you're breaking the hierarchy. You know, if Alex is saying something to us, then it's, you know, like I always say, it's boring to the author. And if Alex is saying something that the audience already knows, it's boring to us. So the only interesting space is to put in something there's ambiguity that calls us to collectively, creatively make meaning together. I mean, it's like a song, right? I mean, that's all. You know, you wrote a lot of songs like that.
I mean, songs are like that, but I think that poetry especially is like that. Songs are like that live, and you know, and I feel like, okay, I need the audience to engage in order for this to be pulled off. But poems are like that um, right off the bat in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It's incumbent upon the writer to leave those gaps so that the participation can happen.
Right. Otherwise, it's not interesting.
Otherwise, it's not a poem. That's what I say. And you know,
yeah. Well, there you go. Yeah. There you
that's what I like saying. I get in massive fights with my wife about this because she loves, you know, these pithy, prosaic poems, and I like them too. I really do. But I love arguing with her and being like, "That's amazing. It's not a poem, though." You know? And,
yeah. If you can frame it and put it on your wall, it's not a poem.
Yeah.
Exactly. If it's a quote for
if it's a
Twitter,
quote,
Facebook, yeah. Well, I mean, I guess like all of Rumi's stuff was completely mistranslated so that it could be some kind of you know, Valentine's Day thing. You know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I have hope for poetry. I mean, I know it's going through a long dark age, but I think it's going to come back. I love that you guys are doing this and just poetry salons and so on. I think I think there's hope for it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Especially if we enter this indeterminate political time. I mean, it speaks to the experience more than anything else.
and we had Bonita Roy on last time, and she's also very philosophical minded like you. And most people know her for her writing. It turns out she's an excellent poet. So
Oh, cool.
people are not showing their poetry. They're kind of keeping it in their
Which I
drawer.
love. That's a good sign, because I think that poetry again is this ritualistic as opposed to traditionalistic. It's sort of interior. It's the division between sutra and tantra, right? Like tantra is poetry, it's the ritual, and sutra is the tradition, it's public. And I think that having you know, I think that that's a very positive incubational sort of mindset.
Yeah. So the dive bar that Tim's talking about, you know, it's kind of a cliche, but it's actually where the king is, you know. It's not where the popular people are. It's not
Sure,
where
yeah.
the masses are. It's where the king hangs out in the dive bar.
That's where it started with me. I was doing readings in this dive bar in the Mission District with Kathy Acker and a bunch of notorious drunks, and that was, you know, great times. Early '90s.
Yeah. Yeah, it was different then, wasn't it? It was so different. Man, not to be nostalgia.
Well, we need the return of cafes and sort of, membraned, small, IRL places. Yeah, that's why I moved to New Orleans in some ways, because the whole city feels like one of those. But yeah, LA certainly was lacking for that, and New York and all of America is really wanting for that. I don't know what it's like in Europe in terms of like in real life salons, but my experience so far recently is like if there's going to be a salon, it's highly promoted and everybody should come and be there, and it's a $5 cover, and it's like I don't want to go. That doesn't sound good.
Yeah. It's a bunch of people sharing their marketing product of home of some kind, or
Yeah. It's
that's the
cultural
problem.
marketing. Never belonged
Yeah.
to a club that would have me as a member.
Yeah, there you go.
Groucho. Yeah, I was just showing You Bet Your Life reruns to my wife last night.
Oh, wow.
Groucho is so good. Yeah.
It was, my God.
But, one thing that I noticed in the change from the early, from the 80s and the 90s into the poetry slam, that started, end of the 90s, was a move from your dirt and your skank and your passion to your politics and your acceptability and your feelings.
Yeah, exactly.
It was
Yeah.
also,
Yeah.
and I applaud to that. It was also just speaking musically, and probably to me, most damagingly, it was also the reification or what's the fucking word I want to look for? The when a set of laws is actually appropriated into law. Anyway, it was the reification of a certain set of rhythmic and musical qualities.
Oh,
And that really fucked poetry up.
totally.
That everyone had to speak in
Stop
this
that.
patois. Like,
Stop that.
Yeah.
like that fucked poetry up more than anything I can and anything possible, because because when you get down to like regimentizing and quantizing the roots of delivery, or the roots of musicality or resonance, or any of these really fundamental things, you negate, like you might as well not say anything. Like you might as well just simply, the most poetic thing you do is refuse to say any poetry. Because that is the death of poetry, the regimentizing of the regimentation
Hmm.
of the musicality, of the delivery, of the
Yeah, but
cadence.
it was because it was pretentious. It wasn't like, iambic pentameter or something.
You're right. There's regimentation that is iambic pentameter, and that was somehow not disgusting. You're right. There was I don't know. It's different than the constraints of pentameter. I don't know why.
Hmm.
Well, because it was just lazy and pretentious.
But
Hmm.
so is pentameter. So is a sonnet. So all
Yeah.
those things are no, they're not lazy, but they're
No, they're not
pretentious.
lazy, I mean, look,
Ah.
you read Keats and you say, hey, God, he had a lot of constraints, but he sure did a damn good job. And some of the other people are, much more constrained and boring.
You know what it is? Let's bring it back to playfulness. There's something about Keats, even, that where within the constraints, you're like, this is somehow playful. It's like being like, okay, I'm being told a children's poem in the best way possible, or something like this.
Exactly.
But and there's a playfulness, and then you get to the idea of Tim's pretension, and you ditch the playfulness, and it's no longer about playfulness whatsoever. It's about, yeah, what would be the pretentious equivalent of playfulness? It's like not a, I don't even know.
It's kind of a bad fashion show or something.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. It got codified.
That's the word I was looking for, codification.
Yeah.
Codification,
Right.
Yeah.
I used to call that the poetry voice. And like you could take any words and just say them in those rhythms, and
Yeah.
people would do that. And you go up on a slam stage.
Yeah, and the really good poets, the guys that were good, like, because I went to millions of salons and open mics in Montreal in the '90s, And the people that were good were just so fucking weird. Like they were just so unbelievably strange. There was no formula whatsoever. They'd come on the stage and you'd be like, you'd be stopped in your tracks because that is you know, what is that? Like what the hell? It's nothing that has any kind of like, I don't even know where it comes from. It's not even an archetype, it was just those were the people that kind of were very interesting, I found, on the stage and when they were reading poetry. But then there was a whole slew of, as Tim described just perfectly. That's exactly what happened when the slam people came in. It became all about posturing and formula,
Yeah.
And winning.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Right,
Some
right.
kind
It
of
became a competition, right?
some kind of prize and like, yeah,
Yeah.
but
Oh man.
but like the good poets always come from the Provence, right? They're always just weirdos from out there, like Rimbaud. He
Yeah,
comes
they
from
don't
the
know better.
Provence.
They don't know any better.
They're not the guys that come from the big city and make it there. They're the strange people that come from the outside to the center or something like
Cripples.
what?
The
Cripples.
cripples.
Yeah, cripples maybe could be.
And the deranged.
Yeah, maybe that's why Lynch films had so much distortion of bodies and all that.
There's also the possibility that we're just increasingly exponentially mimetic, just because of social media and so on, and the way that media operates. Like, if there was one slam poet and came along with that cadence, we'd be all like, okay, cool. But it's the fact that there was like a 3 solid decades of sort of uniformity that we're like, holy shit. So, like in Edward Sharpe, for instance, my band, I'm listening to a lot of Morricone and, and I got that ha, and I was like, oh, that'd be good for these folk songs. So I'm like, ding, 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 ha, ding, 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 right? And I'm doing all these hays and hoes in the middle of these folk songs and so on. And one of those songs blows the fuck up. And then I can't get away from hays and hoes. Immediately,
Oh, shit.
everywhere is hay and hoeing. Everything you see. Honda commercials, fucking everything, fucking Olive Garden, ding, 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 hey. And it's ripoffs of my thing. And I even knew of bands. I mean, we're talking Lumineers, of Monsters and Men. Lumineers went to my producer and said, hey, could you do our thing just like Edward Sharpe? Of Monsters and Men had a huge hit. So similar to Home that when they had an Apple commercial, people called me up and said, congratulations.
Oh,
It was
wow.
immediate.
Wow,
It was
yeah.
immediate. It was
Oh,
almost
man.
overnight, to the extent that when I had a follow-up to that song for the second album, and I left it off the album because I was like, I cannot follow the following. And it's just so quick. So I almost am like afraid of, like, I was talking to another artist recently who has a very particular style, and it got ripped off immediately. And then they're working on something else. And I was like, when are you going to release that? And they're like, I'm scared to,
Yeah.
because I love this, what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I know that if I
Oh, yeah.
release it
Yeah.
Yeah.
and it becomes imitated, I'm going to hate it.
Yep.
And I don't want to hate this thing.
Instant
And
gratification.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
that's
it's
a
difficult.
good that's an indication of integrity, not putting shit out right away,
And
holding
upset.
on to it, keeping it close for a while, Um,
No,
Yeah, but then there's also the thing, if you have an idea and you don't say it, someone else is gonna, it's like you're up against the zeitgeist. So you're like, okay, well, I have to put it out.
yeah.
Anyway, it's an impossible choice. But I do think that, you know, things are so mimetic right now that if something catches fire and people love it, you're gonna have a bazillion adopters. They're all gonna be like, oh, I'm doing the same thing. And you're gonna hate it. And the originator is gonna be like, okay, well, I gotta figure something else out now. I hate that. And for all I know, it's a return to slam poetry, right?
Yeah, it
The
could be.
innovator against
And it's gonna
slam.
be good this time or something weird
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that, right? It's gonna be like really good slam poetry. Wow.
Yeah.
Fuck.
All right. I get random reading for you guys.
Okay.
Right.
You can tell me afterwards who wrote this. I am all one wound, and you, on the loose in the streets of Rome, lost and happy as in the virginity of your mother. I'm drenched in blood and you, untouched, on the red line, along the Tiber in the evening, at the Farnese, in the alleys where the pavement already has a horrible smell of April.
Horrible smell of April. Yeah.
Well, Paso-
Who is it? Oh, Pasolini. Okay.
Salini, he would do that.
Another good one I got recently was
Good job.
Constitution by Pierre Guiteau.
Mm.
And
He's
I
a-
got a new one the other day, Fun to be Dead by
Fun
Robert
to be dead.
Flanagan,
Rob Flanagan.
who's a character. Have you guys ever heard of him?
Yes.
80s Los Angeles performance artist. He died in like 96.
Oh, Bob Flanagan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
What band was he in again? Screaming Trees, I think.
Uh,
No?
Right.
Self-mutilation.
That was a band I knew. I remember those songs a bit.
Mark Flanagan is Screaming Trees. Sorry,
Oh,
Bob Flanagan. I don't know.
Okay.
Bob
Also,
Flanagan's
another
performance
guy.
artist.
Was he in it? Maybe he wasn't in a band.
yeah, I don't
No.
think he was in a band.
Sadomasochism and cystic fibrosis.
Yes. Yes.
Got
Good
it.
old masochism. Missed that.
So are we winding down here or what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same old stuff is happening again. Oh, God.
Andreas, you haven't said anything. Say something, man. Give us some new
Yeah.
voice here in this.
Yeah, I'm glad. This is really something new for me. Yeah? When I was in my 20s, I was very inspired to, I know we share this inspiration with when I met Ivan Illich in America.
Oh, cool.
A friend of his inspired me actually to start reading poetry in the early 80s in California. And I started to read Gary Snyder, and so it really put me alight, and I started practicing meditation with that. And when I came back to Berlin, I was already a musician, improviser, singer, and was pretty wild. And but then we started to write and go and do readings and listen to readings. It was really an inspiring time. And but I had more this classical. I some years ago I started to be interested by David White. He was more like this
Oh
classical.
yeah, he's quite something, David White.
Yeah, he's quite a good. But I started with Snyder and Robert Bly. This stuff. But more like nearly a little bit philosophical, but really good. Yeah, I mean, I find it's really inspiring here that you do this, and I want to come back and I want to find time to scribble more and play around with words. Yeah.
Cool. Well, if you have some poems, bring them along. That's the idea. Yeah.
I really thank you, and thank you, Alex. It's really great, and everyone.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Alex.
Yeah,
Really
thank-
appreciated that coming by. Great.
Yeah, that was great. Great little deadline, false peak for me.
Yeah,
because,
we're also going to publish books at Parallax, poetry books. So
good.
if anybody has
Yeah.
a poetry book they want to publish,
nice.
yeah, I think we're going to publish Joe and maybe David and a bunch of people probably will publish their.
Yeah,
their
Andrew's
poems.
Awesome.
Another guy, Chima, didn't show up. Who's just an amazing poet. I find an incredible poet, and we're going to. I want to put up
and
his
you knew
work.
about Andrew's book, right?
Yeah, he knows about my book.
Yeah, everyone, do you? Okay,
Mhm.
raise your
Yeah.
hand.
Oh yeah.
Andrew's
It's not for me to advertise. This is Alex.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's what I'm
I'm
speaking.
embarrassed. Sorry.
Great.
Yeah.
Andrew, you have a new book of poetry. I remember you're posting stuff on.
Yeah. I wrote a book of poetry, but anyway, but the whole point is I wanted to make was not to promote it, was more that we want to publish things at Parallax, like this poetry salon. I want this to branch out into, like, because it's very easy to publish books, these
Yeah.
days. So we can do that, and if people have books, we can publish them. So
You can do a collective.
I like what I read on
maybe
Substack.
maybe some sort of collective thing, a poetry thing. There's been 10 people now, and there seems to be no shortage of poets, and so I think that could be something interesting. And it hasn't been the lame sort of types of poets that Tim is speaking of. It's been that kind of, everybody's been really high quality, it seems to me, so far.
We love them.
In any case.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's been great. So thank you very much again.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Great.
Thanks. Fun.
They look very studious.
Who looks studious?
Tim, right?
Tim.
Tim. Yeah, I like Tim's kind of like look in the background when he's got his newspaper, and then he comes in and he says something, and it's like,
Right.
it's living poetry. All right. Okay. Good night, everyone.
Thanks.
See you guys.
All right, y'all. Bye.
Bye. Bye.